That table is reserved for people who can actually afford to be here." The manager's words sliced through the quiet murmur of the private dining room, leaving a sudden, uncomfortable silence in their wake. Every head turned to watch as the young delivery driver, still in his uniform, clutched his tip money in one hand while his face flushed crimson with humiliation. In the corner booth, partially obscured by the dim lighting, a large figure paused mid-conversation, his attention now fully captured by the scene unfolding near the entrance. The Monarch was downtown's most exclusive restaurant, where tables were booked months in advance, and the clientele consisted of those whose net worth had more zeros than most people's phone numbers. Tonight was no exception, with a private event hosting the city's financial elite. The delivery driver, Marcus, had spent his entire 12-hour shift bringing food to people's homes, including several orders from this very restaurant. After receiving an unexpectedly generous tip, he'd made an impulsive decision. For once, he would be the customer, not just the courier. As Marcus began to stammer an apology, the manager stepped closer, voice lowered, but still deliberately audible, to nearby tables. "Perhaps you misunderstood. This is a private event. Your kind can pick up orders from the service entrance." Laughter rippled from a nearby table of executives. What none of them noticed was that the large man in the corner had now set down his drink, his expression hardening as he watched. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, unannounced guest at the executive dinner, was about to turn this humiliation into a lesson about true class. Marcus stood frozen, the $20 bill still clutched tightly in his hand. His throat constricted as he tried to swallow past the humiliation. 6 deliveries to this very restaurant tonight, and dozens more over the past year. Yet he'd never been treated as anything more than a faceless service worker. The manager, a slim man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and a tailored navy suit, wore a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name tag read Philip, though no customer had likely ever used it. I saved tips all week," Marcus finally managed, his voice barely audible above the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. "Just wanted to try the food I deliver every day." The restaurant glowed with warmth from crystal chandeliers reflecting off rich mahogany tables. White tablecloths and polished silverware gleamed under the soft lighting, creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and refinement. Conversations had quieted to whispers as diners pretended not to watch the scene while stealing glances at the young man in the delivery uniform, a jarring splash of bright red and polyester among the sea of designer suits and evening wear. "Perhaps another night," Philip said, voice dripping with condescension, "when we're open to the general public." At a corner table, Dwayne Johnson studied the interaction with growing interest. He'd come to this dinner as a favor to a studio executive. These networking events were part of the business, but his attention was now fully diverted. The actor took a slow sip of his water, watching as the young delivery driver shrank under the gaze of a dozen powerful men and women. Something about the kid's expression triggered a memory from decades ago, before fame, before wealth, when he too had been dismissed and underestimated. Another executive joined in, calling out from 3 tables away, "Hey, Philip, tell him our delivery boy discount only applies when he's actually delivering." This earned scattered laughter, glasses of expensive wine raised in amused salute. Marcus's shoulders hunched forward, his body language collapsing inward as though trying to make himself physically smaller. His eyes darted toward the exit, clearly calculating the fastest escape route. The manager stepped closer, turning slightly to ensure his audience could appreciate his handling of the situation. "Sir, if you'd like to place a delivery order, you're welcome to use our app. But this event is invitation only. I'm sure you understand." More snickers followed. One woman, draped in diamonds, whispered something to her companion, who barely concealed his smirk behind a napkin. What happened next surprised even the Rock himself. He found himself standing, his chair sliding back with a soft scrape against the hardwood floor. At 6'5" and built like the former professional wrestler he was, Dwayne Johnson's movement immediately commanded attention. Several heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence, and a ripple of recognition spread through the room. "Is that The Rock? I didn't know he was here tonight." Marcus didn't notice the celebrity's approach, too busy stuffing the $20 bill back into his wallet with trembling hands. The delivery bag slung across his shoulder, the one he'd been too tired to drop off at home after his shift, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a visible badge of his outsider status. The manager's expression shifted instantly upon noticing Dwayne, a practiced smile replacing his previous disdain. "Mr. Johnson, can I help you with something? Another drink, perhaps?" Dwayne ignored him, instead moving with deliberate steps toward Marcus. The room had fallen completely silent now. Even the jazz seemed to have quieted, though it was simply the collective held breath of everyone watching that made it seem so. Executives who, moments ago, had laughed, now straightened in their seats, suddenly aware that something unexpected was happening within their carefully controlled environment. The Rock placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder just as the young man was turning to leave. "Hold up, brother," Dwayne said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent dining room. Marcus turned, confusion flashing across his face before recognition set in. His eyes widened as he found himself looking up at one of the most recognizable celebrities in the world. "You're—" Marcus started, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Dwayne Johnson," The Rock confirmed with a nod and that signature smile that had graced countless movie posters. "But more importantly, I'm someone who knows what it's like to bust your ass all day and still get treated like you don't belong." He glanced pointedly at Philip, whose smug expression had transformed into something closer to alarm. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Marcus said softly, acutely aware that every eye in the restaurant was now fixed on them. I deliver from here all the time. The food smells amazing, and I finally had enough extra cash to try it." Dwayne turned to address the room, his presence commanding, in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size and everything to do with the authentic confidence he exuded. "You know, before I was The Rock, I was just a kid with $7 in my pocket." He paused, letting that sink in. $7. Not even enough to buy an appetizer in this place. Several of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The woman with the diamonds suddenly became very interested in her wine glass. "Success isn't just about where you end up," Dwayne continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd lived his words. "It's about remembering where you came from. And more importantly," he looked directly at the manager, "it's about how you treat people on your way up." Philip swallowed hard, glancing nervously around the room as the power dynamic shifted dramatically before his eyes. "Sir, with all due respect," Philip attempted to regain control of the situation, his voice strained with forced politeness. "We have certain standards, and this is a private event." "Standards?" Dwayne repeated, raising an eyebrow. His tone remained calm, but there was a steely undertone that made it clear he wasn't backing down. "Let me tell you about standards. This young man," he gestured to Marcus, "works hard enough to afford one nice meal, and your standard is to humiliate him? That's not a standard I respect." A murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the executives, a man in his 60s with a reputation for ruthlessness in boardrooms, actually nodded in agreement. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, caught between embarrassment and disbelief at what was unfolding. The celebrity's defense of him felt surreal, like something out of a movie, rather than his actual life. "My friend here has just as much right to enjoy a good meal as anyone else in this room," Dwayne continued, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "In fact," he glanced around, spotting an empty chair at his own table, "he's joining me tonight, as my guest." The studio executive who had invited Dwayne started to object, then thought better of it when he caught the Rock's expression. Instead, he forced a smile and gestured to the empty seat. Of course, any friend of Dwayne's. Philip's face had gone pale, the realization dawning that he'd made a critical error in judgment. "Mr. Johnson, certainly we can accommodate your friend." He practically choked on the word. "Although the dress code—" "The dress code?" Dwayne cut him off. "Let me tell you something about that uniform he's wearing. That's the uniform of someone who spent 12 hours on his feet today, making sure people like us could enjoy meals in the comfort of our homes." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the waitstaff had paused, trays balanced expertly as they watched the scene unfold. One of them, a young woman who had been delivering plates to a nearby table, caught Marcus's eye and gave him an almost imperceptible nod of solidarity. "Come on, brother," Dwayne said, guiding Marcus toward his table. "The porterhouse here is incredible. You've earned it." As they walked through the restaurant, something remarkable began to happen. One of the executives, the older man who had nodded earlier, stood up as they passed. Then another followed suit. Within moments, the entire room was rising in a show of respect that had nothing to do with Dwayne Johnson's fame and everything to do with the point he was making. Marcus, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Dwayne replied, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Just remember this feeling, and someday, when you're in a position to stand up for someone else, you do it." By the time they reached the table, Philip had disappeared, presumably to the kitchen to inform the chef about their new guest. The studio executive, recovering his composure, extended a hand to Marcus. "Richard Whitman, Paramount Pictures. Any friend of Dwayne's is welcome at my table." As Marcus took the offered seat, he noticed his phone buzzing in his pocket. His manager was calling, probably wondering why his last delivery was taking so long. For the first time in 3 years on the job, he decided the call could wait. Across the room, a woman in designer clothes discreetly raised her phone, capturing the moment on video. By morning, the clip would begin its journey across social media platforms. But for now, Marcus was simply allowing himself to experience what it felt like to be treated with dignity in a place where he'd previously been invisible. The chef himself emerged from the kitchen 15 minutes later, a departure from normal protocol that wasn't lost on the regular patrons. He approached the table with 2 magnificent porterhouse steaks, personally setting them down before Dwayne and Marcus. "A special preparation for our special guests," he announced, with a pointed glance toward the back office where Philip had retreated. "This looks incredible," Marcus said, staring at the perfectly seared meat, the aroma making his months of curiosity finally justified. "I've delivered probably 50 of these, but never thought I'd actually try one." Dwayne raised his water glass. "To first experiences," he toasted, "and to remembering them when they're long in the rear view." As they began to eat, Richard Whitman leaned across the table. "So, delivery work. That must give you some interesting stories." The question could have been condescending, but his tone suggested genuine curiosity. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "You'd be surprised what you see, delivering to different neighborhoods, different people." He cut a small piece of steak, savoring it before continuing. "Some people don't even look at you when they open the door. It's like the food just appears by magic." "And others?" Dwayne prompted, genuinely interested. "Others invite you in out of the rain, give you water on hot days, remember your name." Marcus shrugged. "You learn a lot about people by how they treat someone they don't have to impress." The statement hung in the air, simple but profound. Across the table, Richard Whitman's expression shifted subtly, as though testing his own behavior against this unexpected measuring stick. "That's wisdom right there," Dwayne said, nodding thoughtfully. "In Hollywood, everyone's trying to impress everyone else. Gets exhausting trying to figure out who's real." Philip reappeared, hovering near their table with forced professionalism. "I hope everything is to your satisfaction, gentlemen," he said, the word gentleman clearly including Marcus this time. Dwayne looked up at him, expression neutral, but gaze penetrating. "The food is excellent," he said. "The atmosphere could use some work." The manager's smile faltered. "Mr. Johnson, I want to apologize if there was any misunderstanding earlier. We value all our customers." "Do you, though?" Dwayne interrupted, setting down his fork deliberately. "Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you value some customers more than others, based entirely on what they're wearing or how much money you think they have." The entire section of the restaurant had gone quiet again. Philip's neck reddened above his crisp collar. "Perhaps this is a conversation best continued privately," he suggested, acutely aware of the audience. "No, I don't think so," Dwayne replied, his voice still calm but unyielding. "See, public humiliation deserves a public response. You didn't offer this young man privacy when you were embarrassing him." Marcus, caught in the middle of this confrontation, set down his own utensils. "It's okay, really," he began, uncomfortable being the center of such tension. "It's not okay," Dwayne countered, turning to him. "And that's the problem. We get so used to certain treatment that we start believing we deserve it." He looked back at Philip. "This man works hard. He provides a service that your restaurant and your customers rely on. He earned his money and has every right to spend it where he chooses." A few murmurs of agreement came from nearby tables. Philip's discomfort was palpable, sweat now visible on his brow despite the restaurant's perfect temperature control. "What would you have me do, Mr. Johnson?" Philip finally asked, voice tight with controlled frustration. The Rock considered this for a moment, then smiled, that trademark smile that had sold millions of movie tickets, but with an edge to it now. "How about this? Your restaurant offers a special service industry night once a month. People who work in delivery, waiting tables, bartending, they get a 50% discount that one night." Philip blinked rapidly. "That's our margins don't allow—" "Your margins are fine," Richard Whitman interjected unexpectedly. "I've invested in enough restaurants to know what they make on markup." He pulled out a business card, handing it to Philip. "In fact, I'd be interested in backing this initiative. Good PR, good community relations, win-win." The manager accepted the card mechanically, clearly calculating the ramifications of refusing a Hollywood executive. Dwayne nodded appreciatively at Richard before turning back to Philip. "The food industry is one big ecosystem. The people who deliver your food, who serve it, who clean up after, they're not separate from your business. They're essential to it." By now, other diners had openly abandoned any pretense of not listening. Several had phones partially concealed beneath napkins recording the exchange. I'll need to discuss this with the owner," Philip said weakly. "Perfect," Dwayne replied. "While you do that, why don't you have your best dessert brought out for my friend here? On the house?" It wasn't a request. As Philip retreated once more, Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "You didn't have to do any of this," he said quietly to Dwayne. The Rock leaned in, speaking just to Marcus, though the words would soon reach millions online. "In life, we don't do things because we have to. We do them because we can. Because each time someone stands up, it makes it a little easier for the next person to stand up too." By the following morning, the video had accumulated over 2 million views. The hashtag #RockSolid was trending, along with #Service Industry Night and #Standards of Respect. Marcus's full name was never mentioned, a small mercy in the viral storm, but his red delivery uniform had become instantly recognizable. The Monarch restaurant's social media accounts posted a formal apology by noon, announcing the immediate implementation of a monthly service industry night, with 50% discounts for workers in food delivery, waitstaff, kitchen staff, and other service positions. Philip was noticeably absent from the promotional material. Marcus returned to his regular delivery schedule, though things were decidedly different. Customers recognized him, sometimes asking for selfies or simply offering words of encouragement. Tips increased substantially, though that wasn't what stayed with him. What remained was the memory of Dwayne Johnson's parting words as they exchanged numbers outside the restaurant. "Your work has dignity. Don't let anyone tell you different. And hey," he'd added with that signature smile, "if you ever decide to try something new, call me. People who understand the value of respect are the kind of people I want on my team." The business card of Richard Whitman, executive producer, remained carefully tucked in Marcus's wallet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. 3 weeks later, the Monarch's first service industry night was booked to capacity within hours of being announced. Delivery drivers, waitstaff, bartenders, and kitchen workers from across the city arrived in their uniforms, entering through the front door with a dignity many hadn't felt in their professional lives. Richard Whitman made good on his word, privately ensuring the restaurant didn't lose money on the initiative. "It's not charity," he explained to skeptical investors. "It's community investment. These are the people who make our city function." Philip had been reassigned to a sister restaurant in a less prestigious location, a development reported with particular satisfaction by several food blogs. The Monarch's new manager, previously a longtime hostess, made a point of personally greeting service workers who arrived for deliveries, ensuring they had water on hot days and a place to warm up during winter months. Other upscale restaurants across the city began implementing similar programs, partly from genuine inspiration and partly from fear of being the next viral example of service industry disrespect. What had started as one moment of humiliation transformed into a movement that spread to restaurants in Los Angeles, New York, and beyond. Dwayne Johnson never publicly commented on the incident, though he shared the viral video with a simple caption: "Respect is earned through actions, not accessories. Be kind." 6 months later, Marcus enrolled in night classes for business management. His delivery shifts funded his education, though they were now supplemented by weekend work as a production assistant, a position quietly arranged by Richard Whitman after receiving a personal recommendation from a certain Hollywood star. On particularly challenging days, when balancing work and school seemed impossible, Marcus would remember that night at the Monarch. He'd recall not just the humiliation, but the moment when someone with power used it to lift him up rather than keep him down. That was the true lesson. Not that fame provided privilege, but that privilege, of any kind, carried responsibility. As for The Rock, he continued making blockbuster films and inspiring millions through social media. But among all the stories that surrounded his career, there was one that particularly resonated with service workers across America, the night when Dwayne Johnson reminded an exclusive restaurant that true class had nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat the people society renders invisible. Respect, as it turned out, was the most valuable currency of all.